We just toured constantly. Like I mentioned, that first year, we did 280 shows in 1 year. We were on the road so much that like our drummer's car got towed from his apartment complex because they thought he had died or left, or, it was like some
Right.
guys didn't even have home addresses because we just figured why.
Yeah.
Like we just need a place to sleep on the days
Yeah.
we're home, and home was the road. And we just covered so much ground back then because you had to. Either, like you said, there was no other exposures.
Welcome, everybody, to Piano Whisperer. It is great to be back, and thanks so much for being here. We haven't recorded an episode in a very long time, but I'm so encouraged that people are still listening to Piano Whisperer and listening to past episodes. My name is Ben Klinger, and I'm so grateful to be your host, and I'm so grateful that we still have the sponsorship of Classic Pianos, who is continuing to generously sponsor these episodes. Well, having taken the advice of many, we have gone video. So this is our debut video episode, and I am completely honored to introduce to you today Jeff Frankenstein, longtime member of the legendary Christian rock band Newsboys. Before we begin, I want to give you a little bit of background on Jeff. Jeff has been playing keyboards continuously with Newsboys since 1994. It is completely safe to say that Newsboys is one of the biggest bands in Christian music history, having sold more than 10 million records across 23 different recordings and garnering boundless accolades, including 30 number one radio hits, 4 Grammy nominations, multiple Dove Award wins, 2 American Music Award nominations, and from what I could count, actually more than 800 million streams on Spotify and YouTube Music alone, just those 2 platforms. So for over 3 decades, Newsboys have toured extensively throughout the world to present their high energy shows. Newsboys' latest album, Worldwide Revival Part 1, has surpassed previous streaming records, and their single Heaven on Earth broke into the top 40, both on the adult, contemporary, and airplay charts. Newsboys currently are on their Worldwide Revival Nights tour, and so it is my privilege to introduce to you Jeff Frankenstein. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. That was something. I appreciate it.
Well, sure. Well, people always accomplish more than they think, and then they hear it and they're like, wow, is that really me? Right? And,
Totally.
I want to start by saying it was daunting to research a band with 40 years of continuous history. So I consulted ChatGPT and I said, how many bands have been playing continuously since 1985? And said, well, that's a hard stat to quantify, but here's maybe 5 or 6. And I thought, wow, that's an amazing accomplishment. And so congratulations on that. I mean, to stay together that long and to produce music continuously of the level that you have, that really is an amazing accomplishment.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, I usually like to start by just asking a little background. Could you share a little bit about your early years growing up, or what caused you to play keyboards, and who your biggest influences were?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially on a day like today where I'm actually backstage at a show about an hour from where I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. And my mom is actually going to be in the crowd tonight. She's coming to the show. And yeah, so my story and my involvement with music, probably similar to a lot of your guests, goes back to when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. So my mom was a musician and was a music director at our church. And so she kind of forced me into mandatory piano lessons, like probably a lot of your guests, I would imagine, at those years. I think I was like 6 or 7 years old. I did not like it at all. I felt like very uncomfortable trying to learn how to read music. And, when you're a kid in school, you already have enough to learn, and so this kind of thing was, as much as I loved music, it was a struggle. In fact, my first piano teacher, after about 3 or 4 months of lessons, pulled my mom aside and just said, look, I don't think that piano is the thing for your son, and maybe you should put him into some other hobby or something like that. And but I think my mom knew that I loved music so much because I was always digging through her record collection. And back in the 80s was like this really interesting time of Christian rock and Christian music and gospel music. My parents were new to the faith, and so they had this huge, all this vinyl everywhere. And so I was constantly spinning records in the family room. You know, in Detroit, it's cold and dark for half the year, so you're inside and you need something to do. And so music was kind of that thing for me. And I just started creating music on our piano in our house. And my grandfather actually lived in the same neighborhood. He lived right around the corner. I could walk to his house. And he had one of those old Wurlitzer organs, you know, that had all the bossa nova and, you know, all that. And that thing just blew my mind. I would go over to his house and just play it for hours and just take it to the limit of what it could do. You know, at that time, that was the only thing I could get my hands on. And so I think once my mom realized that I was more into like creating than playing someone else's stuff, I think that changed a lot. And so she put me with a teacher that kind of understood that and was able to work with me to kind of build in some creativity and let me create things from scratch and still learn a lot of the classics and do classical music. So I took piano lessons for like 6 or 7 years. And my mom being the music director at the church, I was forced into mandatory duty playing at all these services, which I would probably credit that to being the place where I learned the most because, you know, I was super young. I think I was playing in services when I was like 10, 11, 12 years old. And so growing up in Detroit, we had a lot of great musicians in our church. Our church was pretty big when I was a kid. So they were all older than me. I was always the youngest kid, and they were always trying to teach me and take me in. Our church was, I like to say it was almost like a black church for white people. It was like very Pentecostal. And in the 80s, the services were like, you know, 2 and 3 hours long. So the music part of the service could go as long as like an hour. And so, you know, we kind of had a preset, not very organized. We had like a preset song list of what we thought was going to happen, but it was one of those kind of churches where like anybody could call an audible at any time. There was no preset length to songs. The pastor could introduce a song or just start singing and we would have to follow along. And so I didn't know it at the time, but that was a great environment to learn, you know? And so I would be playing piano and the bass player would look over at me and tell me what key he tried to figure it out, you know, when the song would start and so it was wild, like, and so I was playing like 3 or 4 services a week. So that's a lot of playing time. And then you'd be playing with a youth band, and then I had other bands on the side and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, so that was kind of my upbringing. I was always around music. It was always something that was a big part of our family's life. There was always music on in our house all the time.
That's a great story. And it does go to show, too, the power of the teacher chemistry, right? So many people quit lessons because they feel the issue is with them if they're not taking to piano lessons, right? But it's really a matter of finding out what each person loves and how to reach them. And sometimes you got to, you know, explore and try different things to find the fit. But I'm glad your mom recognized the passion that you had and went with it. That's cool. As I prepared to chat with you, one of the things that really stuck and struck me so profoundly was how different the world was when you started playing with Newsboys, right? I mean, not only was the world spiritually different, which is a different conversation entirely, but it was also like, you know, pre-internet, pre-email, pre-text. There was no MP3s, no streaming platforms. Social media wasn't even a concept. No. And we were using landlines, right, to reach each other. And Christian rock, you know, you were playing it, I guess, but it was really in its infancy in those days. And so I heard the story of how you met the Newsboys, and correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially you agreed to drive them around when they came to your town to play, right? And then later on, you got a call asking you to come to an audition. Is that right?
It's a wild story, yeah. A friend of mine decided to promote a Newsboys show back when the band started because he was a youth pastor and he wanted to bring the band to a local gymnasium as like an outreach thing. And so my mom had just bought a Chevy Astro minivan. And so the promoter of the show knew that I owned it. So I got asked if I would drive the band while they were in town around just to run their errands, go to the hotel, whatever it may be. And I didn't know it, but my friends at the time were talking to the band behind my back, and they were like, oh, this guy plays keyboards and blah, blah, blah. And so I was driving the lead singer to the hotel, and we had just purchased the same exact keyboard. It turns out it was a Korg 01W Pro.
I had a Pro. Nice.
Yeah, awesome keyboard.
That was a great board. It was.
Love those keyboards so much. So I had worked like 4 jobs. I had bought it over that summer. And so I was talking to the lead singer, and so we kind of hit it off a little bit. It was a great experience to see how a tour worked and a band played and all that stuff. As a 18-year-old kid, I was just like, wow, this is really cool. I love this. Little did I know that I was going to get a phone call like 3 months later, because the band keyboard player had gone back to Australia and they needed someone to fill in. And I was in college at the time. The band, actually, I came home from a class, and Peter called, the lead singer at the time, called my mom's house, cold called it. So I get home, and my mom says, the lead singer of Newsboys called the house. He was asking you to call him back. So I get the phone number, call him back. He's like, yeah, would you want to come out to some shows this weekend? And so they were playing in Michigan that weekend. They said, well, just bring your keyboard, come on out, and whatever. So I'm just like, okay. So I drive out there. I stay home from school for like 3 straight days, just learning as much as I can. And when I get out to the show that weekend, they said, well, just set up your stuff and we're going to sound check and you can play along and we'll just hear what you do. And I didn't even know most of the guys in the band's name or any of that kind of stuff. And so our manager was the front of house guy at that time, and he was listening to the sound check, and he came up to me after all that and says, well, why don't you just play for the show tonight? And so that was it. I played with the band right after my audition at the show that night. And after that show, the band was all packing up, and I'm like, well, what's the next steps here? And they're like, oh, we're in Indianapolis next weekend. We'll see you there. So I drove home after that show, and I told my parents what happened, dropped out of college, and moved to Nashville like literally a couple days later, and ended up doing like 280 cities in 1 year, including a trip to Europe and Australia and all these places. I had never left Michigan before this, and this was in 1994. And so it was a lot of experience, but you're talking about how the world has changed since then. And it was, from a technical standpoint, there was so much to learn because, back then we didn't have laptops, we didn't have technology, we didn't have any of the tools that we have. MIDI was very much still kind of in its infancy, and the prices of equipment at that time was so out of reach of what just a normal person could afford. It's not like today, if you have a laptop, you pretty much have every tool you could imagine. Back then, it was kind of reserved for professionals. And so I got thrown into a studio like right away in front of stacks of MIDI gear and samplers and all of this gear that was like really hard to even know how to operate. So that first year for me was tough. I had never lived away from home before, let alone have to adjust to all these changes. And so like I tell people, I'm not like, my playing style is not, I wouldn't say I'm a very technical player, but I've over 30 years of being on the road, I've just had to learn on the fly. So many things I had never thought I'd be doing. Almost like my friends call me the Swiss Army knife of the band. Jack of all trades, master of none.
I wouldn't say that, but yeah, you've done everything from essentially portable stadiums, right? And building those to all the different parts you've created for the songs. I wanted to go back to that because you basically answered like 3 of my questions in a row, which is awesome. No, it's perfect. It's perfect. I want to go back and ask you a couple things. So you had touched on the fact that there were no like technology tools to help you learn, and you had 3 days to do it. So you had to learn like the patch. You had to find a patch that sounded somewhat like what they were doing.
Yes.
How did you do that?
It's an incredible coincidence because we were talking about that Korg 01W, and Peter, the lead singer at the time, the whole record that was out then in 93 and 94 was an album called Not Ashamed. And if you go back and listen to it, that thing is just, he wrote the entire album on the 01W. And so all the sounds from that record were already in the keyboard that I owned. So it was
Wow.
an amazing coincidence that he was actually telling me on the phone, like, well, I use this patch or this patch. And so I had like 3x5 cards, notes for every song. And I was just trying to like dial all that in per song and put all my patches in a row of the way the song went because nothing was automated. And
That's
back then
awesome.
we were constantly like trying to change patches on the fly and match everything from the record in real time and all that kind of stuff, which I loved. Right before I joined the band, I was doing a lot of like electronic music with that keyboard and played in a few clubs and things like that. So I was already kind of in that headspace, and that record was very programmed. And if you remember, kind of influenced by techno at the time, which was the big trend in the 90s. So I feel like, I was kind of set up for success in that I already had a little bit of experience with that keyboard, thankfully. Yeah.
Yeah. It's cool that he could share the patches with you. I still remember the gospel organ patch from that keyboard was awesome. I don't miss Sound 61. I don't use it all the time, but
Yeah, I remember it too. That's hilarious. Yeah. Well, that was a groundbreaking keyboard at the time because it sounded
okay.
like you had the M1 and some other ones before it.
Right. Yeah.
This was like it was such a good step in the right direction as far as sound
Yeah.
quality wise. It would be interesting to hear it now. We'd probably be like, oh, but like back then, that was about as good as you could do, right?
No, yeah, it lasted forever. It was great.
Yeah.
All right. So then you went on the road with the Newsboys, and basically you've been on tour or in the recording studio for much of the last 31 years since then. But again, going back to the early days, how did you guys get exposure? Like how did that all happen? You couldn't like share things on social media and whatnot. So what did that look like? That was a lot of work.
We toured. We just toured constantly, and we were constantly on the road. Like I mentioned, that first year, we did 280 shows in 1 year, and we were on the road so much that like our drummer's car got towed from his apartment complex because they thought he had died or left, or, it was like some
Right.
guys didn't even have home addresses because we just figured why, like we just need a place to sleep on the days we're home, and home was the road. And we just covered so much ground back then because you had to. Either, like you said, there was no other exposure. So we did it the old fashioned way. We had an old bus that was owned by a gangster rap band that we bought, and we had a truck that we all took turns driving, and we all had our different roles in the band. Like I did lights and Jody would drive, and we just had this system where we could just barely survive. I think when I joined the band, those first few years, the most I ever made was like $200 a week. But we loved it. Like we were just having fun. We were
You
young.
did love it. Okay.
And we were seeing the world for the first time, and we were playing shows, and people were packing out these places, and so we met people. We just met people everywhere we went. We were just constantly signing autographs, constantly shaking hands with people, and that's probably I always say that's probably the biggest reason we're still here today, because you would be shocked. Like even tonight we'll meet a few hundred people before and after the show, and like everyone that you meet that shakes your hand, they're like, I remember this or I remember that. There's nothing quite like meeting someone in person. It makes an impression, in a world where, Instagram and social media is so disposable. You see something once, you flick, it's gone, you don't care, and I feel horrible for people that like content managers of record labels that have to make all this content and put thought and art behind it, and then it's so disposed of so quickly and never thought of again, where back then you would put the work in and meet people and you would see the results of that. So now it's like we have sometimes 3 generations coming to our shows, where you get the story from the 90s, then you get their kid, and then the grandkid they've brought that person to the show to see their first show. And it is really humbling to see a fan base so loyal that has stuck with us. And I know, like you said, it's not normal, and it's not normal at all. I had no idea when I left to join the band. I thought maybe a year or two and that would be it, and I'd go back to school and go on with my life. And I'd never thought I'd be starting my 4th decade doing this. So it is really incredible.
That's great. Thank you for sharing all that.
Sure.
And it actually leads perfectly to my next question. So So you were doing all that on the road, and then you guys were in the studio a ton also. And I was just thinking back, and we touched on it a little bit with the O1W, but the recording process has changed so much too. So what's it like recording an album in 1994 versus today? Like, how was that process different?
Yeah, it's a lot different. Back then, it was a lot more of all guys in a room together, where you would rent a studio on Music Row for 3 or 4 months and just kind of sit in there and record and try to get it all in one foul swoop, and then
Yeah.
from there you would go out and tour whatever you made for the next 18 months until you did it again. And we just would repeat that cycle. And it was, it's hard to explain to people, younger people, because it was so primitive. Those early records were, a couple of them we did on like 24 track analog tape. And
Wow.
I always feel badly for the engineers that had to engineer those records because, there was no digital editing, there was no audio editing, there was no pitch correction on anything. And every single thing you had to do, if you wanted to punch in a correction on something, like the engineer literally his timing had to be so perfect as to not destroy anything on either side of the punch in time on the tape and all that. So a lot of stuff was just recorded live or what have you. Whereas now, it would be pretty rare that we would all be together in a recording session. Obviously you would do that live, but everyone's got their little home studios and they're passing tracks and patches and files. And, you might have one producer who's kind of accumulating everything and maybe producing vocals, but everything else is kind of comes from different sources, which in some ways is great because, as kind of like veteran guys with families and kids, we can kind of be set up in our houses and do things that way if we need to. So,
wow. But it also speaks to how perfectly you had to execute everything in the studio. And your albums are all super tight. Like the grooves are super tight and the vocals are super tight. And that is a testimony to playing a lot together and really having it tight, but then also having a lot of ability. That leads well to the next thing, which is I wanted to talk about the evolution of the sound of Newsboys. In the earliest recordings, I personally could definitely hear sort of the British Australian influence. Oh, yeah. It could be sometimes a little edgy, but it was really fun music. I mean, I felt like it was reminiscent of that era for sure. And I feel like the sound got much bigger and more refined over time. And when I was listening to some people talking about the evolution of the Newsboys sound, they often talk about how it changed with every singer change.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't feel that way. I felt like each album was kind of its own encapsulated narrative or its own story. And I didn't feel like the overall sound changed that much, but I wanted to ask your opinion because over a period of 40 years, you did have a lot of bandmates come and go and then sometimes come back. And, it was amazing, again, of the talent, right? So you had like Peter who went from playing drums to playing vocals, and you had people switching around different instruments. And I'm like, wow, to play at that level, different things, and then to sing that beautifully, like that takes a tremendous amount of gifting. And of course you're working so hard, but also there's a lot of talent. But I just wanted to ask, like, how did the change in musicians coming and going, how did that change your creative process? How did that change did you feel like it changed your sound? What are your thoughts about how that influenced the
band?
That's
a really great question. I think it's a little bit of everything, honestly. I think when, as a band that plays together as a unit, you kind of almost become a sports team in some ways. Like everyone knows their strengths, everyone knows their weaknesses, everybody knows where they can pick up the slack. And I think that's what makes a band so cool, is that I think that's kind of a lost art in today's landscape where everything tends to be more based around a persona and a personality. I don't know if social media has kind of shifted culture that way, but like the thought of a team of guys producing something together was a very appealing concept in the 90s, whereas now it's more about, hey, I'm an influencer and this one person can do anything. maybe American Idol was the start of that shift where it kind of shifted towards a singular person or whatever. But I think we've always been thinking about like a general concept of what an album's going to be before it's made, but then sometimes something completely different comes out. And I think kind of like what you said, I think a lot of people have enjoyed hanging with us for the ride, you know. And what you're saying, what we were talking about earlier, like we've had some records like those early ones, Not Ashamed, or that were like completely programmed on computers for the most part, and then added, you know, adding live instruments over loops and sequenced keyboards. And then we've done records where like Love Liberty Disco, if you
One of my
listen to that
faves.
record, well, that tends to be a fan favorite of many. That record, all those songs were played pretty much in one take
Oh, wow.
on analog tape with very little editing. And they were just done in a studio on 16th Avenue in Nashville. And then we overdubbed strings and whatever after that. So I think, you know, we've been willing to take on any kind of challenge, or sometimes when you set the parameters of what you want to do, then you have something to kind of shoot for, you know, and sometimes you miss the mark and sometimes you hit it right on the head. But I think music has changed a lot. And I think that like the 90s, there was a lot more, especially in Christian music, there was a lot more avenues you could explore like creatively, where I think now in Christian music it's really revolved around what people are singing in their churches, and it's a little bit more like corporate. So like we're almost like leading people in songs that everyone can sing, and that's kind of seems to be the theme of these last few records, are songs for the church. Yeah. Whereas in the 90s or the earlier, more rock and roll years, they were just songs that we wanted to do because we thought it was cool. And they're both great. And sometimes it's a mix of both, you know.
Yeah, it was. You listen to the early albums, and some of that was very accessible, and people did adapt that to more corporate singing, right? So that great segue again. So you guys really do. You have this ensemble sound. It's not like a band of individuals. It's really an ensemble sound, and it's really beautiful. And writing, though, in those situations is so collaborative in nature, right? So I wanted to ask, what does it look like when somebody brings a new song to the group, introduces it, and you guys start working on it? I mean, I'm sure it doesn't look any one particular way, but what is that like? Because it seems like such a group effort. It seems like the writing had to have been kind of an ensemble oriented thing too.
Yeah, it comes from multiple sources. So, I mean, like we were talking about it being a team effort. I think we're one of those bands where it's a unique situation where even our manager was like the guy who discovered the band like over 30, almost 35 years ago.
Wow.
He's always been like a band member that's been on kind of equal terms with us. He's just not on stage for all the shows. And there's many people in our crew and office that are similar ways that have been with us for a long period of time. So sometimes a song can originate with someone at the office saying, man, I heard this idea come across my desk, or this song could be done in this sort of way. Or sometimes, you know, like it comes from our lead singer, Adam, who's got a treasure trove of ideas, and they start as like voice memos and slowly develop over time. Sometimes you get the vision of the song right away, and sometimes you don't. And you're just like, but I think when there's a committee involved, it takes a lot of diplomacy, because I think you have to respect the person's gifts and where they're coming from. And you don't want to just be like, that stinks, because I've seen songs that I thought I didn't particularly like end up being the biggest songs we've ever had. And then we've all had ones that we thought were great that just went right over people's heads. So it's all by committee. And I think when you have that and you have a group of guys that can all work together and talk it out and try to figure it out, you will end up with the best possible outcome in the end. And you learn those people skills are taught over 30 years of touring and being cramped in a bus with 12 guys. And I always tell younger people that ask me what touring is like, I'm like, you will end up mostly doing things you never thought you were doing. Like you will, the playing part is it's a very small part of your day. The rest of it is like traveling and can I get along with this person and can I work with these people? So that's a big part of it. Having a good attitude and working with other people will get you a long way.
Yeah, but it's so funny because you're saying, well, some songs take a long time to evolve. But if you think about how many songs you guys write in the span of a year, I mean, you guys are very prolific. And I think Newsboys' long time is a very short time in most artistic worlds. I think you guys are able to put it together pretty quickly. And you guys have been so productive in so many ways. My understanding is that at one point you released a daily devotional. And of course, you were featured in the 2011 film God's Not Dead.
Yeah.
Not only receiving credit for the title track, but also making an appearance in the movie. And so now you're on your Worldwide Revival Nights tour, featuring your latest album, Worldwide Revival Part 1, which by the way, I think is a very beautiful album. It's huge. It's just an enormous album. And you've just re-released a new take of the single from the album, How Many Times, Oh, How You Love Me, featuring your newest bandmate, Adam. And I wasn't sure how to pronounce his last name. Adam, is it?
AG.
AG. Okay, I'm glad I didn't try. Adam AG singing lead vocals. And so you guys are so busy. And so now in 2025, what's foremost on your mind and what's most important to you? And what would you like to share that we haven't already covered?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting time that we're in right now. I think, back in January, our lead singer, Michael, who had been in the band for the last 15 years, retired from the road. And so Adam, like we were talking about the team effort. Adam had been in our band for 3 years. He had fronted other bands that you may have remembered from the 90s, Stellar Cart and a few others. So we were kind of thinking, well, is this it? Are we done? We've been doing this a while, and in typical fashion, Adam has stepped up to the plate and taken over as lead singer. So now all the dynamics change again. And so, honestly, your question is great because I don't know what the future holds. And that's kind of exciting. I feel like the sky is the limit. It's interesting to see the dynamic within the band change as the personnel change. And I've seen Adam step up. He was kind of like, we always joke that he was like the utility guy in the band, who played a little bit of everything. And now he's the lead singer and playing guitar and bass and all these things.
That's what I'm saying. Amazing talent that you guys have.
Now it's like the palette has changed and we'll see where everything takes us. But yeah, typical fashion, we'll be touring and we're headed to Europe this summer and headed to Canada for a few weeks and a lot of places that we haven't been since COVID hit and kind of shut us down for a couple of years. So we're kind of in that cycle and getting back out on the road again, and it's feeling great.
That is exciting. That's great to hear. And I've heard something about a Worldwide Revival Deluxe or Part 1 Deluxe. Can you speak to that at all? Is that coming out?
So the I'm trying to remember everything. The record came out last July, but there was typical deluxe fashion. There was quite a few songs that were still in production at the time. So it'll come out on May 30th. And feature even more songs, and like you were saying, so yeah, and actually some of the best songs will be on the deluxe. So interesting how that works, but so that's coming soon.
So is the deluxe the answer to Part 1, or is there a Part 1, a deluxe, and a Part 2?
That is even a question that we can't even answer yet.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Good. All right. Nice. All right. And
I guess the band.
Nice. All right. That's good. So anything that you would want to offer like young musicians who are starting their journeys, any sort of wisdom that you'd want to offer, not to put you on the spot, and we can edit this question out, but is there anything you'd like to pass on to people starting this journey today?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a couple things. I would say just play wherever you can. I think that's one thing that all of us in this band would say, that whatever opportunity was in front of us, that we were able to play our instrument in front of people, we took, whether it was church or, if it's something you want to do for your life, everything you will learn on the way up is valuable. It's not wasted time. And if you love to do it and you burn to do it, just do it. And I didn't think that I would ever be a professional musician, and I wanted to be, but I didn't think that's what I would do all these years. And so that, and then kind of like what we talked about earlier, just I think that a lot of younger musicians come into it and they have this idea of what they would like to do and what it's going to be and what it's going to feel like. And because we only see the band or the performer on stage, you really have no idea all the other work involved. Like I always tell people that being on stage and performing is the reward for all the other things you have to do to get to that point. Like that's the fun part. Like that's like, we put all this logistics, we put all this work, we put all this promotion into it. When you finally get to the stage, that's the reward for all the other work. And all the other work is what you're going to be doing most of the time. So be prepared for that and be flexible. I mean, I never thought that I would be doing music director duties or making videos or running tracks or MDing or doing any of these other things. That I just wanted to play keyboards, but there was always times where there was a need, and just saying, hey, I might not know what I'm doing right now, but I'm willing to learn and jump in there. And that's great. That's something that you can't learn at school, and that's something that's free. And I would say one more thing is just always keeping a good attitude is really essential, because you're going to have a lot of opportunities to be jaded and be bitter about the way this industry works. And it's important to keep your eyes on the right things and not let the disappointments fester inside of you, and just let them go. It's a small industry, and I've seen a lot of people come into it and burn bridges where you will probably see the same person again further down your career. And so treat everyone with dignity and respect that you come across, because, it's the golden rule, really. Treat them like you'd want to be treated, and that will take you further than you could imagine.
That is super wise and good advice. I'm also reminded, as you're talking about that, sometimes you have a really maybe off moment as a musician, and you feel that moment encapsulates your entire existence,
Yes.
right? And it's just not true that you'll have another moment after that. And it, as you said, it's a process, right? To take everything and learn from it.
Well, yeah, and I think songwriting and just being a musician, I think a lot of people don't realize that songwriting is like, it's a job where you fail most of the time. Like for every 100 songs that's written or you write, maybe one of those is so. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize how sensitive we are as musicians. We're not coming into this in a cocky way where you're like, I wrote the greatest song ever. No, you're just like, can't believe that you, like, out of the 100 you wrote, that one of them actually did anything. You're like, really?
Yeah.
So
That's
I
so
think
funny.
that we're very sensitive creatures, so we have to take care of each other.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is also great. And so how can people find out more about you personally, and also about the Newsboys, your touring schedule, all that kind of thing?
Sure. I mean, newsboys.com is a great place to start. It'll have everything on there: touring, links, music, whatever. I'm on Instagram. I don't post a lot of super original things. I probably should more, and I promise to do so in the future.
Wow.
But you can follow me there, and I'm on it. If you have questions, fire away, send me a DM, whatever. I love to help others if I can.
Oh, that is so generous. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks again. I've really enjoyed this. So, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're on a busy tour schedule, and it's not lost on me. I'm really, truly grateful for the opportunity, and to Natalie, too, for setting this up. And I also want to thank the viewers and the listeners. This would not exist without you. And again, I'm entirely grateful to Classic Pianos, who sponsors this podcast and makes all these episodes possible. So we will see you all again. And again, Jeff, really a privilege to meet you. Thanks again for taking the time.
Yes, sir. Great to talk to you. Have a great day.
To learn more about Piano Whisperer, or to hear previous episodes, you can find us on pianowhisperer.org or on any major streaming platform. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would be genuinely grateful if you would take the time to rate and review Piano Whisperer. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.